Make sure to follow us on Instagram at Whistlethrowers. It's a great way to interact with our show. Our DMs are always open for questions, topic discussions, and more. You will be able to find our new episodes and other announcements there.
I do think the race is over. Thanks for tuning in to the Whistlethrowers podcast. This is Jack Mubarak, joined by
Jack Slowmaker
and Ian Siksinski.
So we got a lot to talk about today, but first we're going to start off with the NBA. This was recorded on April 5th, and last night we saw one of the best offensive performances by a center maybe ever.
Yeah.
And I think the MVP race is sealed, but we're going to discuss it. Does Joel's 52.80% field goal performance seal the MVP race?
Now, I don't want to jump the gun because, as we talked last week, when Embiid missed the one game in Denver, I said you can't overreact to one game, and one game can't necessarily ruin an MVP case. But this feels different than that because it's what he actually put on the court against a really great team. Granted, Boston was missing Jaylen Brown, but the point still stands that Joel Embiid dominated a great defensive squad. And what Jokic did last night, too, I think speaks volumes to how voters are going to decide the MVP coming down the stretch here.
Yeah, I gotta agree with that. However, I do think the race is over, and you kind of hinted at it. It's basically because of what Jokic did last night.
Yeah.
He had 14 points, 10 rebounds, and 4 assists in a loss to the Houston Rockets. And I feel like the fact that it's the Rockets and they're the second worst record team in the league just kind of it stings a little more, and it stings more than Embiid missing that matchup last week against Jokic.
Yeah.
And I think people are going to play the recency bias game, and I think this is going to stick in people's heads way longer than Embiid missing that last game.
It doesn't really diminish anything Jokic has done in his career or this year, but in terms of the MVP race, it's hard to say that Jokic can still win it when he had that horrid of a performance against a bad team, and then Embiid drops 52 and 13 rebounds in a really important game for Philadelphia against a really good team.
Yeah, I actually think that the Nuggets losing this game hurts Jokic's chances way more than the way that Embiid played. Because if Embiid had played at that level, and let's say Jokic has scored his usual 25 points and gotten a triple-double, I still think he would have been fine. The fact that he only scored 14 points, got 10 rebounds, but the 4 assists is putrid in 24 minutes, and the fact they lost by 20 to a team that's banking on getting the first overall pick is terrible, and it does not look good. And the other thing I said last week is that, let's say, in the hypothetical that I gave last week, I had the Nuggets getting 5 or 6 more wins than the Sixers, and that would help Jokic's chances on top of the fact that Embiid didn't play against Nuggets. The Sixers and the Nuggets now have the same exact record, and the Nuggets play in a way worse conference. To me, my mind has switched. I'm now back on the train of thought that Embiid will win MVP. Embiid sold me on his play last night and the fact that the Nuggets just looked awful. But like I said, to me, it's more the fact that the Nuggets lost to a really bad team than the way that Embiid played that made me bring my mind back to Embiid.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And, I mean, a performance like this couldn't have come at a worse time because I feel like if Jokic has a game like this in December or January or November, no one really bats an eye and it's just another off night. But, I mean, coming down the stretch, the Nuggets had the chance to lock up the 1 seed last night. And then the cherry on top is just Embiid doing what he did. You're 100% right, Aiden. And I don't know if people should really be concerned about the Nuggets going into the playoffs after this. I mean, on one hand, it is just one game, but just how terrible they looked. And the Rockets almost gave a formula to the playoff teams on how to at least slow down Jokic. I don't think he's going to go for 14 and play that bad with 4 assists and 8 turnovers. I don't think he's going to do that in the playoffs, but you can I think that this proves that you can hold Jokic in check. And there's no one else on the Nuggets that can really take over a game for them. I mean, besides Jamal Murray, but I think that it's a little too inconsistent at this point.
And here's the other bad thing for the Nuggets right now that is not going to help Jokic's chances and will really hurt them is the fact that the Grizzlies are beating the Pelicans right now by 9 points. If they can win, they'll only be a game back, with the Nuggets having 3 games left and the Grizzlies having 2. There was a very real shot that the Grizzlies can get the 1 seed. And if that were to happen, people would look back at this Rockets game and say, this is a game that you had to win in order to get the 1 seed, and you blew it. And if that were to happen and the Sixers can still finish with the 3rd seed, which to me I feel like they should be able to, but obviously we've seen things happen recently, the Nuggets game being the one that sticks out the most. But if the Sixers can finish with the 1 seed and the Nuggets do possibly collapse to that 2nd spot, I think that will be another thing that will stick in voters' minds when it comes between these two players.
Yeah, I think Jack put it well too. Especially in the NBA, recency bias is just a hell of a drug. And I mean, this is so prevalent in the NBA is how quick national media and national fans are to react to certain things and certain moments. And yeah, I mean, again, just a terrible time. And I feel like it does sort of lock up the MVP because of where we are standing right now, late April, about to go into the playoffs, and everyone's going to use it's a regular season reward, which they should. And I think that what Embiid did last night sort of wraps it up in terms of who had the better season. At least that will be the national perspective, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. I am looking at the current games right now, and I do see at the half of the Kings-Mavericks game that the Kings are up 11, 71-60, and if the Mavericks lose this game, they're basically done because they're going to be a game and a half out of the play-in, and I just don't like those odds because the Lakers have been playing well, the Pelicans are treading water, and it's just not a good situation to be in with 3 games left.
Yeah, agreed. I hear you. And I think that Luka and Kyrie individually have actually played well since the trade deadline or since the Kyrie trade went down. They're putting up good numbers on good efficiency. Not great, but good efficiency. It's obviously the defense that's the glaring question mark, but I think if you're Dallas, you just kind of have to look to next year. I think a priority should be keeping Kyrie, and then you just kind of have to fill in the spaces around it. You're going to need a lot of wing defense, and it's possible. There are small forwards and power forwards who can defend on the wings, so I think it's possible for you to get the right pieces, but that's the tricky part right now is going into this free agency, who are you going to be looking for? And what is the prices that you're going to be willing to hand out to some players?
Yeah, the worst thing about the Mavericks, like you said, Slay, is their defense has been bad. There's no reason they should have lost the Hawks game. They put up 130 points, and that was in overtime too, and they lost 132 to 130. The game before, which is actually the night before the loss to the Heat, 129 to 122. There is no reason to be allowing 130 points to these teams. And I get it. The Heat are a very good playoff. They're ready for the playoff at this point. But the Hawks are not that good. And the Heat are not a team that usually puts up 130. So the fact that you're allowing this, and on top of what you had happen last month where they allowed games to get into the 130, 125 mark, that's just not acceptable basketball at all. And I get that they need to add a couple pieces, but you also need your 2 best players to play well on offense and defense. You can't just let them score 120 points or have you guys score 120 points and expect that to be fine if you're not playing defense at all. That's just not going to work. And I think that the Mavericks are realizing that at this point. Maybe adding a few wing pieces will help, but I still think that it comes down to Luka and Kyrie playing defense. And they're 2 guys that their biggest flaw in their games is defense. And I just don't know how that's going to work.
I actually think Kyrie is a pretty underrated defender. Personally, I think he catches a lot of flack for defense, but I think he can guard pretty much anyone his size in the league or contain them. But I think the problem is I don't think Luka knows how to play with a ball-dominant guard other than him. And, we kind of saw it, they had Kristaps Porzingis for a couple years, and I know he's not a ball-dominant guard, but he was a star in the making on the Knicks, and then he came over there, and he just had no idea how to share the floor with Luka. And it is a problem, too, because that team last year, when they had, Dorian Finney-Smith and all the guys that they lost last year, it was great for him because they were able to beat the Suns by just letting Luka cook and everyone just around him catching and shoot and playing defense, and it worked up until a certain point. But now you got rid of a lot of the defenders and the 3-and-D guys, and he's finding it hard to adjust to having a guy who also needs the ball in his hands to produce.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the thing is, he's going to have to learn, because that's how you win in the NBA is you have to have 2 or 3 guys that can score at a high level, at a high volume. So he's going to have to learn over the course of these next couple of years how to play with another player that might have to shoot 20, 25 shots also, and might have to have the ball in a certain amount of percentage in his hands, just the same amount as you is pretty much. And I think that when you look at someone like Jason Tatum, I think that he's a perfect example of it. I think early on in those years, him and Jaylen Brown kind of struggled to find that perfection and find that middle ground with each other. But now it's obvious that they have, and they're two of the most prolific scorers in the game, on their own. But they're probably a top 5 duo in the NBA right now, and I think that Kyrie and Luka can get to that level. But you're right, like it's a lot of it's on Luka right now because he's going to be the guy there no matter what, pretty much. And he's going to have to be the one that has to learn how to effectively play the game with another ball-dominant guard on the floor. Or at least ball-dominant player, period.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add on top of that other than they're just going to need to play better next year because this trade that was supposed to propel them has been a complete disaster at this point. I mean, they went from being the 5th seed when the trade deadline happened to now missing the playoffs, potentially missing the playoffs, and it seems like that's what's likely going to happen. And that is not at all what the Mavericks were expecting when they made this trade. So they're going to have to look themselves in the mirror and decide what they need to do in order to compete next year because they absolutely can. They have the roster. They have the 2 top talented players at their positions, they're both point guards. And I get that it's hard to share the floor with 2 ball-dominant guys, but offensively it has been working. I don't think that's been the biggest issue. So they're really going to have to figure out how to fix this defensive flaw that they have because that's what's really been holding them back.
Yeah, and that's basically the major playoff implication in the West. The only thing I could really think of in the East is who's going to finish with the 6th seed. And I'm looking towards the game where the Miami goes to Philly, and I think that's going to determine who the 6th seed is right now. Miami is 1.5 games out of 6, and I think if you're a Sixers fan or anyone that holds the 3rd seed and looking down at the 6th seed, like you would so much rather play the Nets than the Heat.
Yeah, I just think that the Nets are a little bit less formidable. Like, although the Heat haven't had necessarily a great year record-wise, they still have those pieces around them that had the 1 seed and went to the Eastern Conference Finals and even went to the finals in the last 3 years. So yeah, I agree with you. I think the Nets are the more favorable matchup for the Sixers.
Yeah, especially because the Heat have been known to knock out teams that they are supposed to lose to. They've done it to the Sixers a couple of times. They did it when they made it into the finals in the bubble. They did it nearly last year when they almost made it to the finals when they had to play this. Wasn't it 6 or 7 games with the Celtics?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they played the Celtics deep, and that was a team that pretty much everyone thought would win the Eastern Conference once they got past the Bucks, and the Heat made that a competitive series. So you do not want to face the Heat in the playoffs, and unfortunately, that's what it's looked like one of these top teams are going to have to do, and whoever it is, I wish them luck, because that is not going to be a team that you can just roll through thinking, oh, they're a 7th, 6th seed, we'll be fine, because chances are you will not be fine.
Yeah, if this standings stays the way it is right now and they end up playing Boston, they're going to wear them down, utterly wear them down.
Yeah, agreed.
And we've seen that happen when the Sixers have gotten the top seed of they get worn down in early series and then get knocked out in the second round. I could see that happening with the Celtics, where you're facing a very tough opponent in the first round and then have to face, at this point, it would be the Sixers, another not easy team. And then even if you got past that, chances are they're going to have to play the Bucks at some point.
Yeah.
And it would, at this point, it looking like the Western Conference Finals, if they can get to that point. So if you have to face the Heat, the Sixers, and then get to the Bucks, I just don't see how there's any way that they can make it into the Eastern or make it into the finals with that route.
Yeah, it's going to be tough for everyone in the East because, like you were saying about the Celtics, it's going to be tough. And that's how it's going to be for, I think, every team except for maybe Milwaukee. I think that if they draw the Knicks in the second round, I think it'll be a little bit easier than if they drew Cleveland. But, I mean, definitely for Sixers and Celtics, they're both going to have to play someone tough in the first round, and then they're going to have to play each other in the second, which kind of favors Milwaukee a little bit because they don't have to necessarily go through the bloodbath that Boston and Philly are going to have to go through.
Well, hold on. If Philly plays the Nets, I think they could sweep them.
Yeah, but I agree with that, but I think it would still be like a really hard-fought series no matter what, and like just 4 really tough games if it came to a sweep.
Maybe, but I just don't see the Nets having the capability of making it a tough physical series just because they don't have the talent. I mean, maybe it's like what happened when the Sixers played the Nets a couple of years ago or a while ago now, when they really didn't have anyone outside of D'Angelo Russell. But even that, the Sixers kind of, to me, sort of just sleptwalk through that series, which can be an issue when you do that because then you make it to the second round. You think you'll be able to do that, and that's usually not the case. Not that I'm saying that's what happened with Toronto Toronto. That was a very hard-fought 7-game series. But that's what happens is you think, oh, it will be easier for us to make it through. You get into a series that's 7 games, you're like, oh, I was not expecting this to happen at all. The Sixers won't have that mentality now because you know whoever's ahead of you is going to be a very, very tough opponent. And pretty much everyone from the first seed to, I would say, the fourth, any of those top 4 teams are going to be a really, really hard out. And even the Knicks will make it competitive, and especially the Heat at the 7th seed will make it competitive. And although I'm not totally counting on the Nets of making any series they play in that hard, there's still not a team that I'm going to fully take out. I just think that out of the top 7 teams, they are the easiest team, which, again, with how competitive the East has been, isn't really fair to how they've played this year.
Yeah, I mean, Mikal Bridges has been playing out of his mind, averaging nearly 30. The assists and rebounds are both close to 10. Like, I just don't want to play a guy that's as hot as him right now. And it seems like everyone sort of on that team, they sort of take to Mikal's lead. Like, they all play exactly the way Mikal Bridges does in terms of energy and effort and resiliency. Like, and that's a great guy to take after. I think he's a super hard fighter on the court. And that's not really a team I want to play, you know. I think that's a team that kind of scares me as a higher seed. But, I mean, it is certainly probable that the Sixers' star power just overmatches them because the Nets don't have anyone that is as prolific as Embiid or even Harden right now, regardless of how well Mikal's been playing.
Yeah, I want to say, as a Sixers fan, like, if PJ Tucker can do what he did last night every game...
Yeah, it's just you got to make those open threes. That's pretty much the Sixers' problem, you know, when you watch them a lot, is the role players just missing those open shots that you should be hitting. I feel like that's their Achilles heel a lot of the times, and rebounding too.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to win a ton of playoff games relying on Embiid to score half their points.
Yeah,
it's just not going to work like that.
Yeah. I think it does say something, though, that they played that poorly and Embiid was still able to will them past the finish line against a good team. You know, I think that this win does have an asterisk a little bit because they were missing Brown, but
right.
I still think it says a lot at the same time.
It does, but it also, again, like you said, it is only 1 game. That's not going to work in a 7-game playoff series.
Yeah, right.
Especially when the Celtics get Brown back.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so we can move into the MLB. So got through the first week, and just opening thoughts, like with the pitch clock, who's been doing well.
Yeah, so I was at the game today for the Phillies and Yankees, and I think it's very evident on TV that the pitch clock is working wonders right now. I think that the games are a lot more watchable. There's definitely a lot more action, and I think today a game like the Phillies and Yankees played proved that the pitch clock is really good for the game because it wasn't high scoring at all, just a 4-2 win for the Yankees, and there was still a ton of action, and it was still very intriguing, and it seemed like the whole ballpark had their eyes on the game the whole time. There wasn't much waiting around and just nonsense time consuming stuff. And I thought the quality of the game was incredibly improved today. And I think that we're seeing that across the league too.
Yeah, the game that stuck out to me the most was the one that Sandy Alcantara pitched last night, actually, as we're recording this on Wednesday, is the fact that it was a 1-0 game that took a little under 2 hours.
Yeah.
That's exactly how games are supposed to be played.
Yeah.
Because without the pitch clock, this 1-0 game that didn't have a lot of action, and again, people that watch baseball, they don't need action all the time. You're not expected to see guys running all over the field. However, if a game only has 6 combined hits and 1 combined run, there's no reason for that game to take close to 3 hours.
Yeah.
There's just not. And so what this rule has done is allowed games to, like you said, Slay, have more action. That's all we want as fans. I could care less if a game took 3 hours, if there was a lot of action. However, I don't need a game with no action happening to take 3.5 hours. There's just no need for that. So I 100% agree. The rule has worked really well. Obviously, there's been a few issues with it. You've seen a couple of guys that are a little bit unsure about it. Some pitchers are still getting used to it. It is going to take a little bit of time for everyone to get more comfortable with the rule. And I think that was expected among fans, especially people that were running baseball. It was expected that this was going to take a little bit of an adjustment period. But I think once that adjustment period goes through, it's going to be so much better for everyone.
I agree. I think the umpires deserve a lot of credit too, because I think they've been doing a really good job managing this new rule so far. And I know we had the Machado incident yesterday, but regardless of that one moment, I think across the board all the games. I think the majority of the time the umpires are doing a really good job.
So
Didn't Tim Anderson get ejected?
Yeah, that was today, I believe.
Yeah. Slay, I do want to ask, because you did say you've gone to a game. I still haven't gotten to one yet. I'm going to a Phillies one in a couple of weeks. But going to a game, how did it, like, you touched on it a little bit, how you said that it's obvious that people are paying more attention. Did it feel rushed at all?
No, that's the thing that I think was really good about it too, was the pitchers and the hitters all seemed comfortable with the flow of the game. Like, you weren't seeing, like, there was never a time when the pitcher had to rush on the rubber real quick, like pretty much fake it, assign it, and get set. Like, that kind of stuff never happened. It just, there was no walking around the mound and standing on the rubber for a good 10 seconds when there's a guy on base. It was just, you gave the runner a look when there's a guy on base, and you wound up and delivered. Like, the flow was super consistent, and I think that was the best part of it. And I think that was what kept fans in the game, was the flow was really good, and the game just moved along really well. And I feel like that's how we are supposed to play the game. And it kind of sucks that we have to have a clock do that for us, but at the same time, if it's a necessity, then it's a necessity and you do it. And that's what the MLB did.
And I am interested to see down the line, obviously this will be years from now, but if more guys are used to doing it this quickly, that they can eventually get rid of the clock. The other rule that I want to touch on quickly is the one where pitchers can only throw over to a base twice. I think that should be 3 times. I understand that you don't want pitchers throwing over every single time, but the way that there's a 3 striking you out rule, I feel like that should be the same for pitchers, where you can throw over to a base 3 times before you can't anymore. Because I feel like twice it's just not enough, and then you give the runner a huge amount of advantage.
Yeah, I actually agree with that too. And I was thinking that during the game, because originally I thought you only got 1 pickoff attempt, which I was like, that's ridiculous. But once I saw it was 2, I was like, okay. But I do agree, because the base runner is getting a huge advantage, and they can feel like they have a lot more freedom and they're dancing around a little bit more. And I know they want to increase the amount of steal attempts. That was pretty much the MLB's goal with that. But at the same time, I think you have to give the pitcher a little bit of leeway. Like, give him a little bit of a strategy, really, because 2 is just too little for a pitcher to work with. I think 3 is a good number.
Yeah, and again, people will say, oh, the pitcher should be able to throw over as many times as possible. No. There's no reason for that. There is no reason for a pitcher to throw over to first base 7 consecutive times, which has happened, by the way, before he throws the home plate.
Yeah,
that's just a huge waste of time. It's just a way for the pitcher not to focus on the batter. It's a way for there to be less action. And the majority of the time, the pickoff attempts don't even work. I saw it happen once recently. It was like, I guess it was last night's game where Trey Turner got picked off for 2 nights ago or whatever. But so it does happen occasionally. It might happen more because now runners aren't going to be 100% sure when a pitcher throws over, which is another reason why I like this rule, because it still does give pitchers the advantage of a little bit more secrecy, where if you're throwing over every single time, the runner knows not to get adjusted for a while.
Yeah,
so you're not going to know.
That was one of the rules that I wasn't really thinking about. I really don't think it should be a rule, but like I said, guys are going to abuse that if, like, there is a pitch clock and it's in the later high pressure innings and they want a time to rest. Okay, they could just throw it over to the base runner and get a couple extra seconds. But I hope moving forward that they change it to 3 pitches, 3 throws, like you guys said. But I really want to let it sink in that it's the player's fault that all these rules have to be put in the first place.
I do agree. Yeah,
and I really hope, like Aiden said, there is a day where we could just go back to a time where we don't need pitch clocks or throws over to first base getting regulated, but for the meantime it'll do. I will say it has made for a lot of more extra base hits, which is awesome for the sport. Obviously we're Phillies fans, so we've been on the opposite end of this, getting blown out a couple times. And I do want to say I am concerned about the team because I know it's only 6 games in, but they have a negative 21 run differential through 6 games. And we're hitting the ball. We're not struggling at bat. We're hitting the ball and we're getting runs aboard, and the pitchers have just not, especially Aaron Nola, has just not been able to handle the new pitch clock, and it's eating him.
Yeah, going into the season, it looked like the bullpen would be a strength of the team too, or at least something they could rely on a little bit, but it has looked atrocious so far. The Phillies brought in 2 relievers today, Gregory Soto and then Sir Anthony Dominguez, who we know Dominguez is good, but they both came in with ERAs that were just ballooned. I mean, Soto was in the 20s and then Sir Anthony was at 10. And I know they just threw an inning, but still seeing those numbers is so deflating. And it's not just them either. You know, like, I don't think anyone has really been good in the bullpen for the Phillies so far. And that's concerning for now, but at the same time, it is early. And I think it's better to be having these mistakes in April so that you can kind of settle in and get on a run a little bit later when the weather starts to warm up and things.
Yeah, what worries me about the Phillies, though, is the amount of injuries that they've had. Brandon Marsh just went down with one. Derek Hall is going to be out for the foreseeable future. No one knows how long he's out for yet. But just the fact that now they're going to have to probably move over to Bohm to first base, which means starting Mundo Sosa, who's fine, but he's not what Bohm was, and it's not what Derek Hall was, or was Derek Hall was expected to be, although he struggled out of the gate too. So now you just have all these injuries. Because now you can't even move Soto to center field, which they probably would have tried to do if it wasn't for the injury to Hall. So all this other stuff with the pitching not playing well, and the fact you're not getting Bryce Harper back till earliest the end of May, it's just not looking like this is going to be their season. And it is disappointing because they came in with such high expectations. They were a lot of people's pick to try to repeat as NL champions, and I just don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I don't see it either. Like, I want to think I'm overreacting, but like all the injuries piling up, and I think the pitching is a really big red flag, and I know it's only 6 games in, but like everyone has had the same amount of time with it, and we have just been bottom of the barrel with it so far, and like I don't really, unless we have a very fast turnaround, I don't see like much of a chance for a repeat.
Yeah, especially because the Braves have gone off to a really hot start. The Mets were just swept, but they still swept their first series. So even if they're playing 500 baseball for a little bit and then get things going, they can easily catch up to the Braves at this point. The Marlins have been so-so, but you have Alcantara who you know is going to pretty much – it almost feels like that he's guaranteeing you win every time he goes up on the mound, or at least will put you in a position to win every time he steps on the mound. So they'll be, to me, fine. And we know the Nationals are terrible. But if the Phillies are on par with the Nationals at this point, I don't think anyone was expecting that, considering that they're playing the Rangers, who are going to be better than last year, but still not great. So it's just not looking good for them. The other team that came in with super high expectations that struggled a little bit out of the gate are the Astros. Again, it's early. They'll be fine. But it is kind of weird to see them get off to a little bit of a slow start, especially losing 3 straight between the White Sox and Tigers. I really wasn't expecting that at all. But they'll be fine. I think it's just a little bit of plain April baseball. They have played at home in both of those series, so they'll be going on the road, which will be interesting. But I think once you play the Pirates and Rangers in a couple of series, they'll be fine.
Yeah, they're not dealing with injuries the way the Phillies are, so that I have way higher hopes for them.
Yeah, I don't really know any team that's dealing with injuries the way the Phillies are, honestly.
Yeah. So we can talk about college hoops now. Last time we talked about college hoops, we were in the Final Four, and now the tournament's over. So just initial thoughts on the championship game and how the Final Four games played out.
UConn won their 5th championship, and the game kind of looked like every single UConn game this tournament. And in the Big East tournament, too. UConn was just rolling and pretty much owning their opponent, flexing their muscle. They looked really, really strong. I mean, in terms of how all the other big teams fared in this tournament, UConn definitely looked the best. I mean, that's obvious. And it showed on the court. I mean, all these teams that had upset bigger teams and were taking out a lot of the top teams, and UConn handled them. I mean, San Diego State beat Alabama, not handily, but they beat them pretty good, and UConn dismantled them. Miami, who beat Houston, UConn dismantled them. You know, Arkansas, who beat Kansas, UConn dismantled them. So I think people are kind of just looking at the seeds that UConn played and saying, oh, this run isn't that impressive. But at the same time, a lot of these 1s and 2s lost to teams that UConn had no trouble with. So I think it speaks to getting hot at the right time, because UConn didn't look like this the entire season. That's obvious. They were a 5 seed going into the tournament, or a 4 seed, I'm sorry. So they didn't look like this the whole year, but they really caught fire late February and then into March, and they carried that throughout the whole tournament. So props to them, and they really deserved this championship.
Yeah, they deserved it 100%. And I just want to say, this may be controversial, but I feel like this was maybe the worst game they played in the tournament, only because San Diego State went like 12 whole minutes, like obviously different parts of the game, but a total of 12 whole minutes without a basket, and that just destroyed them. And like they really did start to make a run in like the last 5 minutes, but it was just too little too late.
Yeah, San Diego State didn't look great at all in the game, and felt like UConn just kind of kept them at arm's reach. They didn't really pound them into the sand. Like, I think if they played the way they did against Gonzaga, against San Diego State, you would have saw the same result, like a 30-point blowout. But UConn just kind of kept them at arm's reach, and then when San Diego State did make a semi-run, UConn answered it pretty quickly and pretty profoundly. I mean, they ended up winning by 13, I think. So, and it was like 10 with about 3 minutes to go. So you never really had any doubt in the end, even when San Diego State made I'll call it a mini run, a mini comeback.
Mm-hmm.
What's amazing about UConn's run is that in 4 of their wins, they held teams to under 60 points and scored 70 or more in all of those wins. That's just, I can't think of a team in recent years that has gone on a dominant run like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there haven't been many champions that really own the teams that they've played the way UConn did, because even last year, when you look at it, like there was the 15 seed that went to the Elite Eight, St. Peter's, and UNC, getting to the Final Four, and then they played number 1 Kansas really tight in the championship, blowing a huge lead. And you didn't see that with UConn this year. There was no team that really put up a fight, and you're right, and that doesn't really happen in March Madness. So I think that makes it all the more impressive for UConn to win a tournament in that sort of dominating fashion, for lack of a better way to put it, because I don't want to say that they dominated every single team they played, but at the same time, no one even really came close.
Yeah, one of the arguments that I've seen a lot on social media is whether or not this now makes UConn a true blue blood program. I think it absolutely does. Okay. I don't really think there's any question. Winning 5 championships in the last 20 or 30 years, it's been maybe even a little bit less than that.
I think a little less than 30 it was.
Yeah, a little. Okay, yeah. So it's been within like a 25-year time period, 5 championships. That's a really, really impressive streak that they've gone on. And considering that they've done it multiple times now where they were under the 3rd seed. And that makes it even more impressive to me that they're able to run through the gauntlet where a lot of teams have been upset. A lot of teams that were expected would get knocked out early, and yet they're still able to make it through and find ways to win. That's the type of program that we don't really see a whole lot.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And just like the way I feel like Villanova sort of played their way into a blue blood status when they won those 2 championships in the 3 years and made it 3 overall as a school, I think that they played their way into the blue blood. I think UConn has done the same thing. UConn is a team that doesn't really have many down years. They're always a team that's at least in the top 25, mixing it up. It's tough to compete every single year in college basketball, but UConn is a team that comes extremely close to doing it. And yeah, you're right. 5 titles in the 25 to 30 years span is, I think that certainly puts you in that region of teams. I think when you talk about blue bloods, it's probably 5, 6 programs. I think UConn's definitely in.
And I think what makes it more impressive, and most people aren't talking about this, is that they've won now in 2 separate conferences.
Yeah.
They won as part of, I believe they won as part of the AACs, and then now in the Big East, which you don't really hear a lot of teams being able to go to 2 different conferences and be able to win.
Yeah. And even considering that, like, they bumped down the last time they moved conferences. Like, they went from the Big East down to the AAC. That wasn't an upgrade. And then they upgraded again, obviously, and did the same thing. So it's, yeah, you're right. It makes it so much more impressive, too.
So,
yeah.
Oh, what are you going to say?
The other thing I wanted to talk about, too, is just the way that San Diego State played as well, because I want to give them credit for being able to beat Alabama, to then beat FAU, which, considering that these were two teams that nobody thought really were going to make it this far, the fact that that was the most competitive game out of the entire Final Four weekend is pretty amazing. And now that FAU, I believe that they're one of the teams that is going to the AAC, I'm excited for what they can do and what the AAC can become as a basketball conference again.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Houston is a good building block for that conference too. Like, they have been in the top 5 final AP polls for probably like the last 5 years. They've been right there, if not in the top 5. So I think that's a good school to build around for your conference as a whole. And I think that ups the standard because now every team in that conference is trying to get to that level, and win their conference, because it's kind of like you don't want to just be like the Gonzaga conference where everyone is saying, oh, well, they play in the AAC, so it's a trash conference. They basically get no respect. You don't want to be in those shoes. So I think that's a good building block.
It will be interesting, though, because Houston is going to be leaving for the Big 12 in a few years. So there is going to be sort of that power void that I feel like FAU can jump into. I'm interested to see what some of these other programs can do. Temple is one that has historically been good, although not really in recent years. But I feel like that this is a conference that can become a basketball conference if they decide to focus on basketball. And I feel like they really should, and sort of try to go away from being a football conference, especially with the amount of teams that are going to be leaving for the Big 12.
Yep, agreed.
So I got one more question for you guys. I'm not tuned into this, but do you know what's going on with Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark?
Yeah. So basically, throughout the entire tournament, Caitlin Clark was doing John Cena's "You Can't See Me" sort of celebration, and Angel Reese has been a very outspoken player, and one that has sort of gotten a lot of flack around the national media because of the amount of times that she's trash talked. And in the championship, when LSU won, she did the same gesture back to Caitlin Clark, as well as held up her ring finger to show that she won. To me, this has been totally blown out of proportion. The other issue is that LSU, there's a whole lot of factors that go into why people wanted Iowa to win the team over LSU. One thing has been transfers. The other is the fact that LSU has been a very outspoken team. And if I'm going to be honest, to me, it does feel like that there is a racial proponent in this, in that the best player for Iowa is a white player and the best players for LSU are black. I feel like as much as people are going to say it's not a racial thing, to me, when you're calling a team that has predominantly black stars, sort of, what was the exact term that they used for them?
Like classless.
Classless, yeah. When you use a term like classless, talking about a bunch of players that are predominantly black, to me, that has racial undertones to it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it speaks more that Caitlin Clark was doing the same thing, and there was nothing said like that about her, and then Angel Reese does it to her, and these things start to come out. I just really don't understand the backlash towards Angel Reese. I love players like Angel Reese who are very energetic and very outspoken and very extroverted, I'll say. I love those types of players and I love those types of personalities, so I have no problem with what they were doing, but it does make me angry that Angel Reese and the LSU team got so much criticism for that, because I just don't think they deserved it at all, and I agree with you that there was racial undertone behind that.
And again, this is not a political podcast, but the fact that Jill Biden invited Iowa also to the White House, to me, there's so much wrong with that.
Yeah.
To start, it sort of brings up the idea that women's basketball isn't as competitive as men's, because this does not happen at all in the men's tournament, where the loser is also sort of half invited, which is what Jill Biden was doing.
He invited the losing team to go to the White House.
Jill did, yeah. She wanted to, but they shot it down.
Yeah.
Good, that's a terrible idea.
Yeah, it's a horrible idea.
It's ridiculous. And again, it brings up the idea that women's basketball isn't as competitive, and it's this whole friendly bunch of people. And of course, it's a lot less aggressive in some cases. Again, that is not the stereotype, but there is instances where it does seem like the women's basketball teams are much more connected together than the men's are. Now, if you're going to talk between UConn and South Carolina, they will 100% disagree with that, with some of the statements that were thrown out by UConn about the South Carolina players. And again, what's happened, though, that to me is the most unfortunate part about this entire thing, is that these stories about certain teams calling other players classless, the media sort of bring up these racial undertones. It's taking away of how much women's basketball has grown in the last 2 or the 3 years. There was like something like 9 million people that watched the finals this year, which is more than any game in the NBA finals, more than any person that watched any game in the NHL finals, and more than any all-star game across the board for men's sports. So we are seeing a massive growth of women's basketball, and this is the storyline that comes out of it. To me, it just sort of also brings up the sexism that we see in women's sports, that we don't want to talk about the growth of it. We just want to talk about the controversial stuff to sort of bring these women down.
Yeah, agreed.
I'm all for drama, but this just sounds so stupid.
Yeah, it really was stupid, and I think a lot of people were almost telling on themselves this weekend after that game.
Did you see that certain people had to walk back their comments too?
Yeah.
Like David, when they literally went off Twitter to go on the Barstool page to defend his comment.
Yeah.
Like, dude, if you're going to be attacked, like just say that you made a mistake and move on. Don't double down on or triple down on 3 different platforms.
Yeah.
Well, you said this is like, Dave Portnoy?
Yeah.
He does that a lot, though.
Yeah, I know he does, but to me, it's just there's certain things where it's like, all right, if you want to be controversial about this like meaningless topic, go ahead. But if you're doing it about this sort of conversation and then also throwing out the word classless, to me, it's just there's so much bad messaging that's coming out. And again, it's taking away from how great the tournament was on its own. No one's even talking about the fact anymore that UConn was knocked out before the Final Four, which again had not happened in close to 30 years. The fact that we had teams like Iowa and LSU making it through the tournament. The fact that we've now seen a new powerhouse in South Carolina, even though they didn't win, they are still now going to be the new standard of women's basketball collegiate teams. And again, none of these storylines are we talking about, and it's really, really unfortunate.
Yeah.
So I'm getting breaking news from our friend Ari at an official sports place. Tyreek Hill plans to retire after his contract expires.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, he says, I'm going for 10 man in reference to seasons. I'm going to finish out this contract with the Dolphins and then I'm going to call it quits. I want to go into the business side. I want to do so many things in my life.
That's interesting. I believe he has, three or 4 years left on that contract?
4 years.
4 years. So that's going to be interesting, and it closes the window for Miami, which is scary for them, I feel like, with this Tua situation.
Yeah, I actually did see the post earlier. To me, I really, really respect that. There's a lot of guys that sort of play out their time too much or sort of think that their entire lives have to revolve around the sport that they played when they can do other things that won't be putting yourself in danger. And I think, well, like you said, with playing with Tua, you saw all those concussions. So you know that this is going to be affecting him. And if your teammate's seen that, you can say, hey, I've made my money. I've got my ring. I can move on when I feel like it. And again, he's saying this with 4 years left on his contract. So he could change his mind. He could say tomorrow, hey, I want to retire now. He could say after the 10 years, you know what, I'm really enjoying myself. Let me continue playing. But I feel like a lot of guys sort of outplay their time and outplay their health. And then you see guys that can't walk anymore, that have to do brain scans all the time to make sure that they're still have the cognitive ability to just do regular activities. So I think this is a really interesting move by Tyreek. I really respect it, and I hope that everything that he does after football will be successful for him. But I really am appreciative that we still get to enjoy the time that he has left because he is a really, really good football player.
Yeah, he will retire on top 100% because he'll be 33 the time his contract expires.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Sure.
Okay, so I think that'll do it for this week. We'll catch you next Saturday at 2 p.m. See ya.